All frontline NHS staff in England will have to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 by next spring, unless they're medically exempt. The government will confirm the move this afternoon. It's thought up to 100,000 staff have not yet had a jab.
It's good news in terms of being able to ensure that we protect staff, patients and visitors from NHS members of staff having infections.
But some health unions say people should be persuaded to be vaccinated, not forced. We'll be asking what's behind today's decision. Also this lunchtime. The mother of the 10-year-old boy killed by a dog in South Wales pays tribute to her beautiful, sweet son. Neighbours describe the scene in the street after the attack.
I seen the body of they put the white sheet over him. I heard the gunshots when they shot the dog, and I seen everyone crying outside.
More questions about MPs' standards as it emerges the former Attorney General Geoffrey Cox earned hundreds of thousands of pounds working for an international law firm. Tension grows as thousands of people camp at Belarus's border with Poland, hoping to gain access to the EU. And going on sale, the diamond-studded bracelets worn by Marie Antoinette shortly before her execution during the French Revolution.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, England's Liam Livingstone says the Yorkshire County Cricket racism scandal has been very troubling for the team. They face New Zealand in the World T20 semi-finals tomorrow.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. The Health Secretary Sajid Javid is expected to announce in the next hour that all frontline NHS staff in England will have to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 by next spring, unless they are medically exempt. It's estimated that between 80 and 100,000 NHS workers in England are currently unvaccinated. Health unions say people should be encouraged rather than forced to have the jabs. There are no plans yet for a similar move for NHS staff in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland. Here's our health correspondent, Catherine da Costa.
NHS frontline staff were among the first to be offered COVID vaccines nearly a year ago. In September, bosses at this hospital in Southampton told staff that those who refused to get jabbed would be redeployed to other roles. Now the government's expected to announce that all frontline staff in England must have received both doses by spring unless they're exempt.
The number one thing we want to do is encourage people voluntarily to take up the vaccine and the boosters because we know it's the best line of defence. The way we get to that, of course, in different settings we'll look at different means to achieve that, but fundamentally the one thing we know, it's indisputable, is the more people have the vaccine, and particularly in those vulnerable settings, the safer we'll all be.
In the NHS in England, more than 90% of staff are fully vaccinated. It's estimated between 80 to 100,000 members of staff have yet to take up the offer. But vaccination rates vary across the country. Dorset County Hospital Trust has the highest uptake with 95%, while Barts Health Trust has the lowest rate at just under 80%.
What's going to make the difference between that and the fullest possible coverage is understanding the data, understanding why people are not yet vaccinated, whether that is actually because they're declining or for some other reason, and understanding those and having those conversations.
Health leaders say certain groups, such as women planning to have a baby and people within black communities, are most hesitant. But with more than 90,000 NHS vacancies in England, many feel getting the tone of the policy right is essential.
If we lose significant numbers of staff as a result of mandatory vaccination, then that's going to put very, very significant pressure on the NHS. So what we're saying to the government today is, yeah, absolutely see the logic of why you would want to do this, but please help us manage the risk of losing NHS staff.
Care home staff in England must have had 2 COVID vaccines by Thursday's deadline. While vaccination rates have risen to over 90% in social care, there are reports of staff leaving the sector. The government knows it can't afford more shortages within the NHS, particularly over winter. The hope is, by delaying the deadline till spring, will buy more time to boost uptake. Catherine Da Costa, BBC News.
And let's get the thoughts of our medical editor, Fergus Walsh. Fundamentally, what is driving this, Fergus? Because obviously the NHS can't afford to lose staff.
Absolutely, but I think the government will have seen the success of what's happened in places like France and Italy. In France, for example, compulsory vaccination, that policy was announced in July, and back then there were just 60% of healthcare workers were immunised. It's now, according to the French health minister, above 99%, and they've just had 2,000 resignations as a result of this compulsory policy. So I think they'll be hoping that people who work in the NHS will feel that they can be persuaded and encouraged. They've had nearly a year to take this up, but there will be the concern, and there is the concern among health unions and among employers, that this stick of basically saying no jab, no job may be the final straw for many staff who've gone through, of course, the pandemic. They're exhausted, they're under a lot of stress, and it might be the final straw for some staff who think they've had enough.
Fergus, thank you. Fergus Walsh. A 10-year-old boy who was killed by a dog in South Wales has been named. Jack Liss was attacked while on a play date in a house near Caerphilly yesterday afternoon. His mother has paid tribute to her beautiful and sweet son. The dog was put down. Gwent police say no other animals were involved and they are continuing to investigate. Our Wales correspondent Thomas Morgan reports.
A devastating blow in this close-knit community as a family is shattered, having lost their child to a dog attack. Gwent police have now confirmed the name of the boy that died as 10-year-old Jack Liss. He doesn't live here, he lives nearby, and locals have suggested that he was visiting a friend after school at the property where this shocking attack took place yesterday afternoon. Local residents describe Monday as both tragic and upsetting.
When I was out there, I felt like really shaky and I was scared because I seen the body over they put the white sheet over him. You heard the gunshots when they shot the dog. I just started shaking and I was getting really scared.
The kids, they were screaming, they were crying, they were just, well, you can imagine, they were hysterical, absolutely hysterical.
Neighbours have also suggested that the dog involved was being looked after at the property and had only been at the residence for a day or two. There's still a police presence here today as they try and decipher exactly what led to the death of Jack Liss. Thomas Morgan, BBC News, Caerphilly.
A man who was stuck in a cave in the Brecon Beacons for more than 2 days is said to be in good spirits in hospital. About 250 volunteers worked for more than 50 hours to bring the caver out. He was rescued last night and has suffered serious injuries, including a broken jaw, although he was able to speak to his rescuers throughout. The row about MPs' standards shows no sign of dying down this lunchtime, with fresh claims about MPs' second jobs. Labour says it's a question of leadership for Boris Johnson and are demanding action over the former Attorney General Geoffrey Cox, who, it's emerged, has earned hundreds of thousands of pounds from work with an international law firm advising the British Virgin Islands. Downing Street says the Prime Minister doesn't back an outright ban on second jobs, but believes MPs should be visible in their constituencies. From Westminster, here's our political correspondent Nick Eardley.
Another day of difficult headlines for the government. What started as a row over one MP breaking lobbying rules has led to wider questions over whether the government takes standards seriously and whether some MPs are spending too much time on second jobs.
What are you doing? You are not children in the playground, you are legislators.
So Geoffrey Cox was a key player in Parliament's Brexit battles. But since being sacked as a minister, he hasn't been in the Commons much at all. He has, though, spent around 1,000 hours in the past year working as a lawyer. And here he is in the British Virgin Islands earlier this year. He's advising the government there. And according to the Daily Mail, he spent weeks in the territory as Parliament was sitting. Someone else cast his vote because of COVID restrictions at the time.
Ultimately, it's one for his voters to decide. I don't think it's for me to start making or prejudicing the second-guessing the judgments that they make. What's crucially important is transparency around any outside interests, and then ultimately the voters will decide at the ballot box, as they do, and they do so for Geoffrey, they do so for me.
A number of MPs have second jobs, but few earn as much as Sir Geoffrey. The most recent register of interests show he earned hundreds of thousands of pounds for his legal work. There is no suggestion that Geoffrey Cox has broken any rules, but his case adds to questions about the balance between MPs' work in Parliament and any outside jobs. Number 10 said this afternoon that the primary work of MPs had to be serving their constituents and that they needed to be visible in doing so. Some want the government to go further.
It's absolutely staggering that Geoffrey Cox has made over £1 million in the last year advising the British Virgin Islands, a territory known for its tax avoidance and tax evasion, whilst the vast majority of MPs were working harder than we've ever worked, helping serve our constituents through some of the toughest times of their lives. Clearly, Boris Johnson now needs to decide whether it is acceptable for Geoffrey Cox to both serve as a Conservative MP and as a Caribbean-based barrister.
It's been a difficult week for Parliament, with questions over MPs' priorities and their outside interests, and whether reform is needed. Many are still looking for fuller answers. Nick Earley, BBC News, Westminster.
Belarus has been told by the European Commission that it must stop sending migrants to the border with Poland. Tension has been escalating in the area, and the Commission says there are currently 2,000 people at the border behind a razor wire fence, hoping to cross and therefore gain access to the EU. Paul Adams has this report.
A cold, bleak start to another day on the Polish border. Thousands of migrants, mostly Iraqi Kurds, spent a freezing night out in the open, waiting for a chance to cross into the EU. But Poland is adamant, determined to defend its borders, accusing Belarus of orchestrating the whole crisis. The Polish Prime Minister visited the border this morning. He says the security of the EU is at stake and that the President of Belarus is using civilians as a weapon.
We know that this is a fully planned operation which aims to disrupt the sovereignty of our country. That's absolutely clear to us. We know for sure that there is a search for weak spots happening on the border.
Yesterday, frustration turned to anger. For months, migrants have tried to cross in small groups through the forest. With winter approaching, they're losing hope and becoming desperate.
Well, there is no legal way for them to cross the border in the space which is not designed for that. It's also risky, and we have had noticed fatalities when people lost their way in the woods, in the rivers, in the swamps, with temperatures which are now in Poland already sub-zero temperatures.
Poland has stepped up security along the border. The EU and NATO have both said they're ready to help. There's talk from Brussels of further rounds of sanctions against Belarus. Minsk says it's not responsible, but critics of the Belarusian government say there's little doubt.
Actually, the Belarusian regime is involved in migration smuggling because there is evidence already that there were state-owned tourism agencies in Belarus that actually sold these tourism packages to migrants in the Middle East to come to Belarus and then travel to the EU.
And so the standoff continues. Civilians trapped in appalling conditions. The UN says it's alarmed. The use of refugees to achieve political ends, it says, must stop. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Rolls-Royce has secured funding to develop small nuclear reactors in the UK to generate cleaner energy. More than half of the £400 million for the project will come from the government, the rest from private investors. And Rolls-Royce says 40,000 jobs will be created by 2050. But critics say money should be spent on renewable power, not nuclear. Our business correspondent Theo Leggett reports.
A nuclear power plant, quick and cheap to build and capable of powering 1 million homes. A consortium led by the engineering giant Rolls-Royce thinks a new generation of so-called small modular reactors like this could help provide the country with reliable and relatively affordable low-carbon energy. The reactors would be based on the technology already used in nuclear submarines. Nuclear plants don't burn fossil fuels, so they don't produce the greenhouse gases associated with climate change. Their power comes from nuclear fission, which generates intense heat, but they also produce potentially very hazardous radioactive wastes.
This is something that we can do today, to start making an impact today, to create green jobs today, that we know will deliver zero carbon electricity.
The idea behind modular reactors is that because they're small, they could be built to a standard design in a factory and installed stage by stage. This should allow them to be made relatively cheaply, for about £2 billion each, and they could be built quickly. By comparison, the much bigger and more powerful reactor being built at Hinkley Point in Somerset is expected to cost more than £20 billion. About a fifth of our electricity currently comes from nuclear power. And the government thinks a new generation of reactors, both small and large, will be vital to help meet our energy needs in the future.
Small modular reactors, very much cutting edge technology. They give us baseload, they give us the ability to have a secure energy supply. And also critically, it means something like 40,000 well-paid jobs in this area.
But critics say this is the kind of thing the government should really be spending its money on. They claim the Rolls-Royce modular reactors will still be far too expensive and that the sums don't really add up.
The money should be spent on renewables, technology that's already here, that's far, far, far cheaper, far quicker and far easily deployable. To back up renewables, we've got increasing storage. We need to upgrade our grids so that we can distribute our energy.
For the moment, though, the government seems committed to nuclear. And with many of the country's existing reactors due to be shut down within a few years, the need for new sources of power is becoming ever greater. Theo Leggett, BBC News.
The time is 17 minutes past 1, our top story this lunchtime. All frontline NHS staff in England will have to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 by next spring unless they are medically exempt. The announcement is due from the government in the next hour. Still to come here, a trip to Windsor Castle for Marcus Rashford. The England striker picks up his MBE for his campaign against food poverty.
Coming up on the BBC News channel, could Steven Gerrard return to the Premier League, this time as manager, with the Rangers boss one of the leading candidates to replace Dean Smith at Aston Villa.
Now, it is nearly 3 months since the Taliban regained control of Afghanistan, and evacuation flights out of the country have largely stopped. But with increasing poverty and hunger, thousands of people are still trying to find a way out. The remote town of Zaranj, close to the border with both Pakistan and Iran, is a people smuggling hub. Traffickers there have told the BBC that the demand for what they do has more than doubled since the Taliban takeover, and that many of the Afghans fleeing hope to eventually reach Europe. Sikandar Kamani sent us this report.
Afghans are leaving in their thousands, smuggled out from this remote corner of the country, headed for the desert, through Pakistan, into Iran. No visas, no immigration, just people traffickers who pay a small fee to the Taliban. Most desperate men hoping to find work. But there are whole families here too. Aren't you worried about going with all these young children?
در دولت سابق خودم معلم بودم در مکتب کابل معاش نبود معاش نداد دولت معاشای ما ماند دستین ما مجبور شدیم این فرزندای ما چی بخورن
At times it feels as if the whole of Afghanistan is trying to find a way out. In this dusty car park, passengers wait to start a journey that will take more than a week. The economy is collapsing and few have faith in the new Taliban government. At least 4,000 leave here every day, we're told. This is a deeply surreal sight, a huge people smuggling hub operating completely openly. The Taliban say that rising poverty here means that it's not possible to stop all these people from trying to leave the country. They say all they can do is control how many people get into these trucks to make the journey a little safer. Everyone wants to go to Turkey or to Europe. Where do they want to go? The Taliban are making money off this trade, around $10 per truck. But they say the economic crisis and freezing of international funding makes the flow of people unstoppable. All these people are traveling without visas. It's illegal. Zaranj has long been a people smuggling centre. Under the previous government, corrupt officials were paid off. Now, the trade is flourishing. Aren't you exploiting these people, exploiting their misery? At the border with Iran, hundreds of Afghans are deported back every day. But many more are setting off for the desert. We meet labourers, former soldiers, civil servants. They survived the war, but are fleeing its aftermath. Sikandar Kamani, BBC News, Zaranj.
Here, the government's chief scientific advisor has warned that climate change is a far bigger and potentially deadlier problem than coronavirus. Sir Patrick Vallance says, as with the pandemic, tackling global warming needs a combination of science and people changing their behaviour. He's been speaking at the COP26 conference in Glasgow.
Of course, coronavirus has been devastating and it's affected people right the way across the globe, but it will settle down and it will go back to being a seasonal disease of some sort, most likely. This is something that's getting worse over a very long period, and without concerted long-term action, it will continue to get worse.
Sir Patrick Vallance. Well, our science correspondent Rebecca Morell is at the conference in Glasgow. Rebecca, what sort of reaction are you hearing to Sir Patrick's comments?
Yeah, well, the comments really are resonating here. I mean, walking around the conference, you can't fail to forget that the problems of COVID and climate change are happening in tandem. And today is all about science and innovation here. So, as Sir Patrick Vallance said, you know, science can be part of the solution here. We've seen that with coronavirus, but it's not the only thing we need. We need big behavioural change. And if we're to cut emissions, we need to change many aspects of our lives, from the way we travel about, to the food we eat, to what we buy, to how we heat our homes. And he says that green choices need to be the easiest choices. And he also warns, though, if we don't take action now, we're going to see big problems in the future. And this has also been echoed by a new report today published by the Met Office, which looks at the issue of heat stress. This is where you get a combination of extreme heat and humidity. So the heat warms up your body, you get hot, But if you have humidity, your sweat can't evaporate, so you can't cool down. Your internal temperatures rise, and this can be deadly. We know that it's already affecting 68 million people around the world today. But if global temperatures go above 2 degrees Celsius, that's going to affect 1 billion people. If they go above 4 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels, that's going to be 3.5 billion people exposed to that. That's a massive swathe of the world's populations, which is why scientists say it's so important to try and keep global temperatures down. And we're going to be finding out in the next hour or so how we're doing with that. So a new assessment of the climate pledges offered by every country here and the reality of what these countries are actually doing. And we're going to see how that's going to be affecting global temperature rise. But the concern is that we're really not doing enough.
Rebecca Morrell, thank you. The England and Manchester United striker Marcus Rashford has been given his MBE at Windsor Castle. The award recognises his campaigns to support vulnerable children. Our correspondent Dan Johnson is in Windsor this lunchtime. Dan.
Yes, this was to recognise Marcus Rashford's charity work, his campaigning, because his efforts last year during the pandemic actually changed government policy on free school meals vouchers for children. Extending that through the summer holidays was the prime focus of his initial campaign. But he's carried on that charity work, focusing on issues like poverty and homelessness. And it's that charity work that was recognised here at Windsor Castle this morning as he was presented with his MBE by Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge, who said that he was very pleased to be back giving out honours and awards at his first in-person ceremony since the start of the pandemic. So there have been a few people here this morning collecting their honours, but Marcus Rashford said he was particularly proud to pick up his, and he dedicated it to his mother, Melanie, who was here with him. Well, he also said that his charity work will continue.
Hopefully everything should be in place by the time I retire. So hopefully, I don't have to do it after I do retire. But that's many years away. So whilst I'm still playing, I'll still be doing it, and hopefully we can find a cause to the problem and eradicate it.
You said there's more to come.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's only 24, Marcus Rashford, but already his influence extends way beyond the football pitch to the palaces and into politics as well. A very influential young man, promising that there will be more to come. Well, also recognised here at Windsor Castle this morning was Sheila Hancock, the actress who was made a Dame Commander. She's somebody who's getting quite used to these ceremonies because she was already an OBE. She's already been to the palaces and picked up awards, but she said she was very pleased to be here today. And the Welsh Rugby Union player Alan Wynne-Jones was made an OBE.
Dan, thank you. Dan Johnson at Windsor Castle. 2 bracelets which belonged to Marie Antoinette, the last Queen of France, will be auctioned this afternoon. They were smuggled out of the country before Marie Antoinette was executed during the French Revolution. Each bracelet contains 112 diamonds, and they're expected to fetch record prices. The auction is taking place in Geneva, from where Imogen Folks reports.
A pair of bracelets containing 112 diamonds. They once graced the arm of Marie Antoinette. When the revolution began, France's last queen managed to save her jewels, smuggling them out with her daughter. She couldn't save herself. Tonight, more than 2 centuries after her death, the bracelets will go to the highest bidder, blue-blooded or commoner. But for how much?
Price-wise, I don't think you can put a price on history. How much is someone willing to pay for something from the last Queen of France? There's a piece of French history that has remained within those families for more than 200 years. And again, that is exceptionally rare to find, and especially jewels of such great quality.
There's more royal jewellery, a huge sapphire and diamond brooch with matching earrings, once owned by Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, the aunt of Russia's last Tsar. These jewels were smuggled out of Bolshevik St. Petersburg, hidden in a newspaper. The Duchess died in exile in France. And finally, there's a rainbow of rare modern diamonds, pink, orange and yellow. But the stars of this week's auctions are undoubtedly the historic jewels. with their message perhaps that while diamonds are forever, those who wear them, however grand, are not. Imogen Folks, BBC News, Geneva.
Now, before we take a look at the weather prospects, just to tell you, you might remember the hundreds of thousands of ceramic poppies which were displayed at the Tower of London in 2014 to mark the centenary of World War I. Millions of people went to see them then, to enjoy them as a work of art and to take time to reflect. Well, now, in the run-up to this year's Armistice Day, the poppies have been given a permanent home at the Imperial War Museum North in Manchester. And as promised, that takes us into the weather prospects. Thomas Schaffenacker has joined me. Hello.
Hello, Jane. Pretty quiet on the weather front out there right now. And it's very mild. I mean, it was such a mild night. Temperatures were in double figures across the south of the country, and it'll stay mild really for much of the week. Now, in terms of the weather itself, there is a little variation from region to region across the UK, and it's brought by this, let's call it a cool front that's sliding across the UK right now. And it's only moving very, very slowly. To the north of it, we've got fresh, fairly chilly Atlantic air, but that's across Scotland and Northern Ireland. To the south of the weather front, we've got those mild conditions, but actually even in Northern England, temperatures are around 13 degrees or so. But where the cloud is thicker in the south today, there is a possibility of a few splits and spots of rain, but the vast majority of us, I think, a dry afternoon in store. And to be honest, not much is going to change over the next 24 hours or so. This weather front really is very slow moving, or rather it's sort of moving along itself towards the east. So I think across England and Wales, it's going to be cloudy and damp overnight in some areas, double figure temperatures, so very much like last night, whereas in the north of Scotland, we will probably see a touch of frost, particularly in the Glens. So here's the forecast for tomorrow. And again, when I say a slow-moving front, it's still there. Again, bringing those similar conditions to at least the southern half of the UK, around 15 in London, 13 in Liverpool. In the north of the UK, 11 degrees and much brighter weather. Now, here's the weather map for Thursday. So this is what we call a ridge of high pressure. There's lots of weather fronts here, but some weather fronts are more intense, others are weaker. And I think the ones that are across the UK on Thursday just show a bit of cloud across the north and the south. But the real weather that's going to turn is still at this stage waiting out in the Atlantic. Not approaching us on Thursday. Thursday's still a dry day for the most part. 14 in the south, 11 in the north. So really, we're not going to see that much change through tomorrow or Thursday. The change, we think, comes on Friday. This low pressure will swing in off the Atlantic. Obviously, isobars there, so that means winds spiralling into the centre of the low pressure. Windy conditions, particularly out towards the west of the UK. Now, exactly where this low will go, could go a little bit further north or south, will have a bearing on the kind of rainfall distribution we'll get across the UK. But I think suffice to say, it will be a little changeable on Friday with showers coming and going. But temperatures still around 12 to 14, 15 degrees, so on the mild side. And you can see it stays pretty mild for the time of the year for the rest of the week. And the weekend, generally, I think it's not looking too bad at all. It just might be a little on the cloudy and chilly side closer to the North Sea coast. But I think overall, could be worse. Back to you.
All right. Thanks very much, Thomas. Thank you. And just a reminder of our top story here this lunchtime. All frontline NHS staff in England will have to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 by next spring, unless they're medically exempt. An announcement is due from the government in the next hour. And you can, of course, keep up to date with that. Stay with the BBC News channel to hear that announcement from the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, and all the reaction to it. That is it from the BBC News at 1 team, so it's goodbye from all of us. On BBC One, we'll join our news teams wherever you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.